I'm Abigail, 28, a software developer in Boston whose life changed forever last year. For as long as I can remember, my brother Ryan was the golden child. But when my parents refinanced their home to give him $230 kelvins for his latest business venture and called me a failure in the same breath, something inside me broke. I stopped calling them. I stopped visiting. I needed to find out who I was without their judgment hanging over me. Before I share the whole painful journey with you, let me know where you're watching from in the comments and hit that subscribe button if you've ever had to choose between family and self-respect. Growing up in suburban Ohio, I never questioned the dynamic in our family. It just was what it was. My father, Michael, worked as an investment banker, putting in 60-hour weeks and coming home with stories of market trends and business deals. My mother, Catherine, had been an elementary school teacher before Ryan was born, but she left her career to become a full-time mom. Our neighborhood was filled with similar families, comfortable two-story homes, well-maintained lawns, and an unspoken competition about whose kids were achieving the most. From my earliest memories, there was always something special about how my parents treated Ryan. When he was 7 and I was 3, I remember watching from the doorway as my father taught him to tie his shoes. "That's my boy," Dad would say, ruffling Ryan's hair. "Quick learner, just like your old man." When I asked Dad to teach me a few months later, he directed me to Mom, saying he had important paperwork to finish. These small moments accumulated throughout our childhood. Ryan's room was decorated with championship trophies from Little League, soccer, and eventually high school basketball. My parents attended every game, my father often taking half days off work to make it to the important ones. Meanwhile, my bedroom shelves filled with books about computers and science fiction, interests that were met with polite nods rather than genuine enthusiasm. When Ryan won his regional basketball championship at age 16, our parents threw him a massive party. They invited the entire team, hired a professional photographer, and Dad even brought in a former college basketball coach as a surprise guest. I remember standing in the corner, nursing a soda, watching my parents beam with pride as they introduced Ryan to their friends as the star player and our champion. Just 3 weeks after that party, I won first place in the state science fair with a program I'd coded that could identify patterns in climate data. Mom and Dad didn't attend the fair. Dad had a work commitment, and Mom needed to drive Ryan to a basketball camp interview. When I came home with my blue ribbon and a college scholarship recommendation, Mom said, "That's nice, honey," before asking if I'd finished the laundry she'd asked me to do before I left. It wasn't that they were cruel or that they didn't love me. I know they did, in their own way. But their love came with conditions, achievements that matched their vision, accomplishments they could understand. Basketball trophies made sense to them. Computer code did not. By 13, I'd saved enough from birthdays and babysitting to buy my first real computer. I'd spend hours in my room, learning to code, teaching myself languages that felt like magic, a way to create something from nothing but logical thoughts. While Ryan practiced jump shots in the driveway, with Dad rebounding for him, I was building my first websites and simple games. "You're spending too much time on that computer," Dad would say during dinner. "It's not healthy. Look at your brother, out there staying active, building real-world skills." The irony that my computer hobby would eventually lead to a 6-figure career while Ryan's basketball would peak in high school wasn't apparent to any of us then. High school only widened the gap. Ryan was varsity captain, prom king, and popular. I was the quiet girl who helped teachers troubleshoot their classroom technology during lunch breaks. My parents attended Ryan's games religiously, but found reasons to miss the technology showcase, where my interactive art installation won top honors. The prize included an article in the local newspaper, which Mom dutifully cut out and magneted to the refrigerator, underneath Ryan's full-page feature, for scoring 30 points in the regional semifinals. My determination to excel despite their indifference became the driving force in my life. Every time they missed an achievement or downplayed an accomplishment, I channeled that hurt into learning more, building better projects, pushing myself harder. I wouldn't just succeed, I would succeed so dramatically they couldn't possibly ignore it. By senior year, when college applications were due, I had taught myself 5 programming languages, built a portfolio of projects, and maintained a 4 gigapascals. I applied to MIT's computer science program, a reach school by anyone's standards, but especially for a girl from suburban Ohio whose guidance counselor had suggested community college might be more realistic. The day the acceptance letter came is burned into my memory. I stood in the kitchen, hands shaking as I read the words again and again. Full acceptance, partial scholarship, the validation I had craved for so long. "Mom, Dad," I said at dinner that night, my voice quivering with excitement. I got into MIT. Dad looked up from his pot roast. "MIT? Isn't that expensive?" Mom added. "That's in Massachusetts, right? So far away." Ryan, to his credit, gave me a genuine, "That's awesome, Abby." It was the most enthusiasm anyone at the table showed. Later that week, Ryan received his acceptance to the State University's business program, a school with a 76% acceptance rate. My parents took us all out to the nicest restaurant in town. They ordered champagne. They toasted the future businessman of the family. The contrast with my own news couldn't have been clearer. That night, alone in my room, I made a promise to myself. I would build a life so undeniably successful that they would have to see me, really see me, for the first time. Moving to Massachusetts for MIT was like stepping into another dimension. Suddenly, I was surrounded by people who spoke my language, both literally in terms of coding and figuratively in terms of passion for technology. The campus buzzed with innovation, with students who stayed up all night working on projects not for grades, but because they couldn't bear to stop until they solved the problem. During orientation, I met Jasmine and Taylor, 2 other computer science freshmen who would become my first real friends. Unlike high school, where my technical interests had made me an oddity, here they made me part of a community. The 3 of us would claim a corner table at the campus coffee shop and code for hours, challenging each other and collaborating on increasingly complex projects. My parents' financial support was minimal. "We can help a little with tuition, but MIT was your choice," Dad explained. "You'll need to figure out the rest." Meanwhile, they covered Ryan's full tuition at State University, his apartment, and his living expenses. Their justification was that his business degree would require networking and maintaining appearances, expenses I presumably didn't need as a computer science student. I took out loans and worked 20 hours a week at the campus IT help desk, plus occasional weekend gigs doing website development for local businesses. Between work, classes, and sleep deprivation, I called home less frequently. When I did, the conversations followed a pattern. "How's school?" Mom would ask. "Great. I just finished a project using machine learning to—" "That's nice. Ryan's business fraternity just had a big networking event with some important executives." And so it would go. Their updates about Ryan's college experience were detailed and enthusiastic. Their questions about mine were perfunctory, their attention waning when I tried to explain what I was learning or creating. In my sophomore year, I took a course taught by Professor Diana Wilson, one of the few female faculty members in the computer science department. She was brilliant, having pioneered work in artificial intelligence before most people even understood what the field was. After I stayed after class several times to ask questions, she invited me to join her research team. "You have a natural talent for this work," she told me after I debugged a particularly challenging piece of code. "Have you considered pursuing graduate studies?" It was the first time an authority figure had specifically recognized my abilities in technology. I nearly cried on the spot. Professor Wilson became not just a mentor, but the supportive adult figure I'd been missing. She recommended books and conferences, reviewed my independent projects, and eventually helped me secure an internship at a leading tech company in Boston. During this time, Ryan dropped out of business school halfway through his junior year. "College is for people who need a system to succeed," he explained to me during one of our increasingly rare phone calls. "I've got bigger plans." Those bigger plans involved a sports bar concept near his former university. He pitched it to our parents as an investment opportunity, complete with overly optimistic revenue projections and buzzwords he'd picked up from his business classes. They refinanced their car to lend him $50,000 as startup capital. The bar opened with a big party that my parents attended proudly. I couldn't make it due to finals but sent a congratulatory text. 6 months later, the business failed due to mismanagement and an overestimated market. Ryan explained it away as valuable experience and a stepping stone. My parents agreed, seemingly unfazed by the loss of their money. By contrast, when I mentioned struggling to cover next semester's books after my laptop died and needed replacement, Dad suggested I learn to budget better. I graduated from MIT with honors, having already accepted a position at Horizon Technologies, a growing firm in Boston's technology corridor. Professor Wilson attended my graduation ceremony, whooping loudly when my name was called. My parents and Ryan came too, making appropriate noises of congratulation, though they seemed most impressed by the campus architecture and the famous alumni mentioned in the commencement speech. At dinner afterward, Dad raised a toast. To Abigail, who's proven she can work hard, and to her first real job. The word real stuck with me, as though the past 4 years of pushing my intellectual limits, working while studying, and building a foundation for my career weren't real. As though only now, with a company willing to pay me, did my work have value. I returned to my parents' home for a brief visit after graduation, before starting my job and moving into my first apartment in Boston. Walking into my childhood bedroom felt strange. The posters and bookshelves belonged to a person I no longer was. Downstairs, Ryan was staying in his old room between ventures, as he put it. He'd moved back home after the bar failed and was already talking about his next big idea. That week at home made the growing distance between my family and me impossible to ignore. They asked surface-level questions about my job but glazed over when I explained what I'd actually be doing. They seemed unable to grasp that I wasn't just working with computers but would be developing sophisticated software systems that thousands of people would use. When I left for Boston, Mom hugged me tightly and said, "Don't forget to call home," while Dad added, "And try to save some money. The real world is expensive." I nodded and promised, already knowing that home was now something I would need to build for myself. The first months at Horizon Technologies were exhilarating and exhausting. I was assigned to a team developing data analytics software for healthcare systems, complex, demanding work with real-world impact. My colleagues were brilliant, driven people who pushed me to grow technically while teaching me the professional skills my education hadn't covered. I lived in a tiny studio apartment in Somerville, taking the T to work each day, spending evenings and weekends, exploring Boston, or working on additional certifications and skills. Money was tight, but for the first time in my life, I felt completely independent. Each decision I made, from what to eat for dinner to which technologies to learn next, was mine alone. At work, I quickly gained a reputation as someone who could solve problems others found intractable. 6 months in, I identified an inefficiency in our testing processes and developed an automated system that reduced quality assurance time by 40%. My team leader Brandon was impressed enough to mention it to the CTO, who called me into his office. "That testing framework is impressive," he said. "We're starting a new project next quarter, a complete rebuild of our analytics engine. I'd like you on the core team." The promotion came with a significant pay increase and more responsibility. I called my parents to share the news. "That's nice, honey," Mom said. "Oh, did we tell you? Ryan is starting a new business. It's an app for college students to find local events. He's got investors interested already." Those investors turned out to be my parents, who put $75,000 into Ryan's app idea, despite his having no technical experience or understanding of the mobile application market. He hired a development team from overseas who delivered a buggy, barely functional product 6 months later. The app launched to minimal downloads and was defunct within a year. Another $75,000 gone. Meanwhile, I was thriving. The analytics engine project was challenging but deeply rewarding. I worked directly with our lead architect, learning system design principles that transformed how I approach software development. When the product launched successfully, the entire team received bonuses. I used mine for a down payment on a small but charming condo in Cambridge, my first real estate purchase at age 25. I invited my family to visit my new place. Mom and Dad came for a weekend, making appropriate noises about how cute it was, though Dad couldn't help commenting, "Pretty small for what you must have paid." Real estate is a different game in Ohio. They spent most of the visit talking about Ryan's next venture, something involving drop shipping rare sneakers. This one failed even faster than the app, burning through $35,000 in just 4 months. The pattern continued for the next few years. I built my career methodically, earning promotions, expanding my technical expertise, and gradually increasing my financial stability. I developed a groundbreaking data visualization system that became one of Horizon's flagship products, earning industry recognition and a substantial bonus. I made friends, dated occasionally, and built a life I was proud of. Ryan bounced from one doomed enterprise to another, a subscription box service for sports memorabilia, a social media marketing agency for local restaurants, a cryptocurrency investment group. Each began with grandiose projections and ended with losses, each funded primarily by our parents, who continued to believe the next idea would be the big one. Family gatherings became increasingly difficult. Thanksgiving of my 27th year stands out particularly. I'd just been promoted to lead developer, managing a team of 8 engineers on Horizon's most important project. When I mentioned this at dinner, Dad nodded briefly before turning to Ryan. "Tell Abby about your real estate opportunity," he prompted, eyes lighting up. Ryan launched into an explanation of a guaranteed return property development in Florida that he was coordinating with a business associate he'd met at a conference. He had no experience in real estate, construction, or project management, but he spoke with absolute confidence about the minimum 30% returns investors would see. "Your father and I are putting in $50,000, Mom added proudly. "It's an investment in Ryan's future." I couldn't help myself. Isn't this the 6th investment in Ryan's future? What happened to the returns from the others? The table went silent. Dad's face darkened. Not everyone succeeds on their first try. Ryan has entrepreneurial spirit. He's willing to take risks, not just collect a paycheck from some company. "I don't collect a paycheck," I countered. "I've built systems that help hospitals manage patient data more efficiently. I lead a team that creates real products used by real people, and I've never asked you for money to do it." Ryan smirked. "Some of us aim higher than just being another cog in the corporate machine, sis." Mom jumped in with forced brightness. "Who wants pie? I made pumpkin and apple." The subject was changed, but the tension remained. I flew back to Boston the next morning instead of staying the planned extra day. 2 months later, I met James at a tech conference in San Francisco. He was a UX designer whose thoughtful approach to technology aligned perfectly with my own values. Our first date lasted 5 hours, as we talked about everything from ethical data use to our favorite sci-fi novels. By our third date, I knew this relationship was different from any I'd had before. As we grew closer, James came to family events with me. After our first Christmas together at my parents' home, he asked carefully during our flight back to Boston, "Is it always like that?" "Like what?" I asked, though I knew exactly what he meant. "The way they focus on your brother and dismiss what you do. The way they talked over you when you mentioned your patent application, but spent 20 minutes discussing Ryan's idea for a food truck business." No one outside the family had ever named the dynamics so clearly. "Yes," I said finally. "It's always been like that." James took my hand. "You know that's not normal, right? You're literally changing the way healthcare data systems work. You've achieved more by 27 than most people do in their entire careers. They should be bragging about you constantly." Something about hearing it from someone else, someone who had no reason to be biased, cracked open a door I'd kept firmly shut. "I've never been enough for them," I admitted, tears welling up. "Nothing I do is ever the right kind of success." "Then maybe," James said gently, "it's time to stop seeking their approval and fully recognize your own success." That conversation was the beginning of a painful but necessary shift in how I viewed my relationship with my family. James encouraged me to set boundaries around how much their opinions affected me. We talked about what healthy family dynamics looked like, drawing examples from his own supportive parents who celebrated each of their children's unique paths. With James's support, I began the difficult work of separating my sense of self-worth from my parents' validation. I couldn't have known then how crucial this foundation would be for what came next. The call came on a Tuesday evening in April. I was working late, finalizing a presentation for an industry conference where I'd been invited to be a keynote speaker. James was at my place, making dinner while I wrapped up my work. "Abby?" Mom's voice had that forced cheerfulness that always meant uncomfortable news was coming. "How are you, sweetie?" After minimal small talk, she got to the point. "Your father and I wanted you to hear this from us. We've decided to refinance the house to help Ryan with his new business venture. It's very exciting. He's partnering with someone from his old business program to open a chain of fitness centers. Very innovative concept." I gripped my phone tighter. "Refinance the house? How much are you giving him?" A pause. "Well, with the equity we've built up and current interest rates, we were able to access $230,000. My stomach dropped. The house, the home they had worked so hard for, the security they had always emphasized, leveraged for one of Ryan's schemes. "Mom, that's a lot of money. Has Ryan shown you a business plan? Market research? Anything concrete?" "Of course he has." Mom sounded defensive. "He has a whole presentation. Your father says it's very professional. We're having a family dinner this Sunday to celebrate the new venture. We'd love for you and James to come." Despite every instinct screaming not to go, I agreed. James and I flew to Ohio that weekend, checking into a hotel rather than staying at my parents' house, a small boundary I'd begun establishing. The dinner started pleasantly enough. Mom had prepared her specialty, beef Wellington, and Dad opened expensive wine. Ryan arrived last, bringing his business partner Scott, a loud, overconfident man who immediately dominated the conversation with industry jargon and name-dropping. After dinner, Ryan set up his laptop for the presentation. The business concept was a chain of elite fitness experiences targeting affluent professionals with promises of exclusive equipment and personalized training. The slides were slick but light on substantive financial projections or market analysis. When I asked about competition from established luxury gyms, Scott jumped in. "We're not just selling fitness, we're selling a lifestyle brand. This isn't something someone who works with computers would understand. It's about creating desire, exclusivity." I noticed my father nodding along, completely sold on the concept. When Ryan finished the presentation, Dad raised his glass. "To the next fitness moguls. We're proud to be your first major investors." I couldn't stay silent. "Can I ask a few questions about the financial model? The startup costs seem underestimated, and I'm not seeing realistic customer acquisition figures." Ryan rolled his eyes. "Not everyone approaches everything like a programming problem, Abby. Business is about instinct and vision." "It's also about math," I countered. "These membership projections would require capturing about 30% of your target market in the first year. That's virtually unprecedented in any industry, let alone fitness, which has incredibly high competition and customer turnover." Dad put down his glass hard enough that wine sloshed over the rim. "That's enough, Abigail. Not everything needs to be picked apart and analyzed to death." "I'm not picking it apart, Dad. I'm asking basic questions any investor would ask. $230,000 is your retirement security. Don't you want to make sure it's a sound investment?" "We believe in your brother," Mom said quietly. "We always have. Believing in someone doesn't mean handing them your life savings without due diligence," I insisted. "Ryan's track record with businesses has taught him valuable lessons," Dad interrupted. "That's how real success works. You try, you fail, you try again. At least Ryan tries to make something of himself. You just took the safe route. In many ways, you're a failure." The room went silent. Mom gasped softly. Even Ryan looked uncomfortable. "A failure?" I repeated, my voice barely audible. I put myself through MIT. I've developed software that helps hospitals save lives. I own my home outright. I've never asked you for a dime since college. How exactly does that make me a failure? Dad waved his hand dismissively. You work for someone else. You'll never build real wealth that way. Never create anything truly your own. You took the easy path. Something broke inside me at that moment. The last thread of hope that they would ever see me clearly, ever value what I had built and who I had become. I stood up slowly. Thank you for dinner. James and I need to leave now. Don't be so sensitive, Dad said. We're having a family discussion. No, we're not, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. You're not interested in discussion. You've never been interested in who I actually am or what I actually do. You've decided what success looks like, and it looks like Ryan, regardless of actual results. I turned to my brother. Ryan, I hope this works out. I really do. But this is the last time they should finance your dreams while dismissing mine. James took my hand as we walked out, leaving my family sitting in stunned silence. In the car, the tears finally came. Deep, wrenching sobs that carried decades of inadequacy and invisible achievement. They'll never see me, I whispered as James drove us back to the hotel. Nothing I do will ever be enough. Then, maybe, James said, taking my hand, it's time to stop trying to be seen by them and focus on the people who do see you. That night, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. I would stop seeking my parents' approval. I would stop calling them every Sunday. I would stop visiting for every holiday. I would give myself permission to create distance until I could interact with them without feeling diminished. The next morning, we flew back to Boston without saying goodbye. My phone filled with text messages from my mother. Confused, then worried, then angry. My father left a single voicemail. You're being childish and dramatic. Call your mother. I didn't. The first weeks of limited contact were surprisingly difficult. Despite years of disappointment, I found myself reaching for my phone every Sunday evening, the habitual time for our weekly calls. I'd stare at the screen, compose texts I never sent, and wonder if I was overreacting. Family estrangement is rarely a single event, my therapist, Dr. Lin, explained during our second session. It's usually the final straw after years of a pattern. The question isn't whether your reaction to that specific comment was proportional. It's whether the boundary you're setting now is necessary for your well-being. I'd started therapy 2 weeks after the disastrous dinner, recognizing I needed professional guidance to process not just the recent confrontation, but the lifetime of family dynamics that had led to it. Dr. Lin specialized in family systems and adult children of emotionally unavailable parents. I feel guilty, I admitted during one session. They're still my parents. They did provide for me growing up. They paid for part of my education. Shouldn't I be more forgiving? Forgiveness and boundaries are not mutually exclusive, she replied. You can forgive someone and still recognize that their behavior is harmful to you. Love doesn't require unlimited access. Meanwhile, my mother's messages continued. We miss you. Please call. I don't understand why you're doing this to us. Notably absent was any acknowledgement of what had happened or my father's hurtful words. At work, I threw myself into my projects with renewed focus. The keynote presentation I delivered at the industry conference was met with acclaim, leading to speaking invitations at other events. Horizon's CEO noticed my rising profile and invited me to join a strategic planning committee, a rare opportunity for someone at my level. Your ability to communicate complex technical concepts to diverse audiences is exceptional, he told me. We need that perspective as we plan our next generation of product. James remained my steadfast supporter, never pushing me about my family situation, but always willing to listen when I needed to talk through my feelings. As our relationship deepened, I was introduced to his family, his parents Sarah and Robert, and his sister Emma. Spending time with them was both healing and painful, highlighting what healthy family dynamics looked like while reminding me of what I'd never had. Tell me again about that visualization system you developed, Robert asked during a dinner at their home in Providence. Sarah and I were trying to explain it to our friends, but I don't think we did it justice. That simple expression of interest in my work, wanting to understand it well enough to share it with others, brought me to tears in the bathroom later that evening. As months passed, I built stronger connections with friends and colleagues. Jasmine from MIT had also settled in Boston, working for a biotech firm, and we resumed our tradition of coffee shop coding sessions, now focused on personal projects and skill building rather than assignments. I joined a rock climbing gym, discovering an unexpected passion for the physical and mental challenge it provided. I volunteered at a weekend coding camp for girls, finding purpose in mentoring young women entering the field. The 6-month mark of minimal contact arrived during the holiday season. My mother's calls had become less frequent, but more emotionally charged. "We don't understand why you're punishing us," she said in one voicemail. "It's Christmas, Abigail. Family should be together at Christmas." I sent gifts, carefully chosen books and specialty foods, but declined the invitation to come home. Instead, James and I spent Christmas with his family, who welcomed me warmly and gave me thoughtfully selected presents that reflected my interests and personality. The contrast with my own family's general gifts, scented candles, generic sweaters, was striking. "You seem lighter," James observed as we drove back to Boston after the holidays. "More comfortable in your own skin." He was right. The distance from my family's expectations and judgments had created space for me to recognize my own achievements without the filter of their approval. I was building confidence in my choices and direction, no longer second-guessing decisions through the lens of what my parents would think. Meanwhile, occasional updates about Ryan filtered through my mother's messages. The fitness centers had opened, 2 locations instead of the planned 5, with a soft launch rather than the grand opening originally envisioned. Reading between the lines of Mom's deliberately positive updates, I suspected things weren't going as planned. At the 9-month mark, I received an unexpected text from Ryan. "The business isn't going well. Dad's having health problems. Thought you should know." I called my mother immediately. After awkward greetings, she confirmed that Dad had been experiencing chest pains and elevated blood pressure. "The doctor says it's stress-related," she explained, her voice tight. "He's worried about 2 financial matters. The investment in Ryan's business." A pause. "The centers aren't performing as projected. There have been cash flow issues." Translation: they were losing money, possibly at risk of losing the house they'd leveraged. Despite everything, my heart ached for them. They were still my parents, still the people who had raised me, however imperfectly. "Do you need help?" I asked, surprising myself with the offer. Mom's voice cracked. "We might. I don't know yet. Your father doesn't want to discuss it." After the call, I sat in my living room for a long time, thinking. The situation presented a complex mix of emotions: concern for my parents' well-being, lingering hurt from our last interaction, and the practical question of what kind of help I could or should provide. I discussed it with Dr. Lin in our next session. "I have the financial means to help them if needed," I explained. "I've been saving aggressively, and my investments have done well. But I'm worried about falling back into old patterns. What would make helping them different from enabling the dynamic you've been working to change?" she asked. It was a profound question that led to several sessions of exploration. Eventually, I developed a framework for potential assistance that would maintain my boundaries while still offering support to my family in crisis. The key, Dr. Lin helped me see, was that any help would need to come with clear conditions and expectations, not as punishment, but as a way to ensure healthier interactions. As the 1-year anniversary of our confrontation approached, I made a decision. It was time to see my family again, not to resume old patterns, but to establish new terms for our relationship. Terms that allowed me to maintain my hard-won self-respect while still keeping a connection to the people who, despite everything, were part of my history and identity. I arranged to meet my parents at a restaurant near their home, neutral territory that would allow us to have the difficult conversations we needed without the emotional weight of the family house. James offered to come with me, but I decided this was something I needed to do alone. Seeing my parents walk into the restaurant was jarring. They had aged visibly in the year since our last meeting. Dad looked thinner, his confident stride replaced by a cautious gait. Mom's hair had more gray, and the smile she offered seemed fragile, uncertain. After awkward greetings and brief small talk, I addressed the situation directly. Mom mentioned you're having some financial difficulties. I'd like to understand exactly what's happening so I can determine how I might help. Dad's pride was still evident in his stiff posture, but necessity overcame reticence. The story emerged in pieces. Ryan's fitness centers had failed catastrophically. The innovative concept had attracted initial interest, but couldn't sustain membership. Costs had far exceeded projections. The business partner, Scott, had pulled out after the first 6 months, leaving Ryan solely responsible for the failing enterprise. We're 3 months behind on the refinanced mortgage, Dad admitted finally. The bank is sending letters about foreclosure. What about the business assets? Equipment? Leases? Mostly leased, not owned. And the leases are underwater too. I nodded, processing the information. And Ryan? Where is he in all this? Mom looked down at her untouched salad. He's pursuing some new opportunities in Colorado. He felt terrible about everything, but he needed a fresh start. Of course he did. I pushed down the surge of anger. This meeting wasn't about Ryan. It was about my parents and our relationship going forward. I'm in a position to help with the mortgage situation, I said carefully. I can provide funds to bring the payments current and help with regular payments for a period while you stabilize. But I have some conditions. Dad's expression tightened. Conditions? Yes. First, I need full transparency about your financial situation. All accounts, debts, assets. Second, you need to work with a financial planner of my choosing to develop a sustainable path forward. Third, and most importantly, we need to address the dynamic between us. What dynamic? Mom asked, though her eyes suggested she knew exactly what I meant. The one where my achievements are dismissed while Ryan's failures are financed. The one where I'm called a failure despite building a successful career and stable life. The one where I'm not seen or valued for who I actually am. Dad started to protest, but Mom placed her hand on his arm. Michael, she said softly, listen. And surprisingly, he did. For perhaps the first time in my adult life, I spoke without filtering or downplaying, and my father actually listened. I explained how their differential treatment had affected me, how their dismissal of my career and accomplishments had cut deeply, how the failure comment had been merely the culmination of a lifetime of feeling second best. When I finished, silence hung between us. Dad cleared his throat, eyes fixed on the tablecloth. I never realized, he said finally. I never thought. We always knew you'd be fine. You were always so capable, so self-sufficient. Ryan needed more support, more encouragement. Everyone needs support and encouragement, Dad. Even capable people. Maybe especially capable people, so they know their capabilities are seen and valued. More conversation followed, difficult, halting, but more honest than any we'd had before. No miraculous transformation occurred. Decades of established patterns couldn't dissolve in a single dinner, but cracks appeared in the facade, allowing glimpses of potential change. By dessert, we had reached an agreement. I would help them catch up on the mortgage and provide monthly assistance while they worked with a financial advisor to restructure their retirement plan, significantly downsizing in the process. In exchange, they would commit to family therapy sessions when I visited, and make efforts to understand and acknowledge my life and work. As we were preparing to leave, Dad said something that caught me completely off guard. Your software, the hospital data system. I looked it up after our argument. I didn't understand most of it, but the testimonials from doctors. They said it saves lives. Actual lives. I never realized. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was an acknowledgement. The beginning of seeing me as I actually was, rather than as they had perceived me. When I returned to my hotel that night, I had a text from Ryan. Heard you're in town and bailing out Mom and Dad. Always the perfect daughter. The message dripped with resentment. I called him immediately, This isn't about being perfect, Ryan. It's about being responsible. Easy for you to say from your high-tech job and perfect life, he snapped. My life isn't perfect. It's just built on consistent effort rather than get-rich-quick schemes. And unlike you, when I make mistakes, I don't leave others to clean up after me. The conversation devolved quickly, years of unspoken resentment pouring out from both sides. Ryan accused me of showing off, of making him look bad by comparison. I accused him of exploiting our parents' favoritism, of never facing consequences for his failures. They gave you everything, I finally exclaimed. Every advantage, every second chance, every dollar they could spare. Do you have any idea what I would have done with even a fraction of the support, emotional and financial, that they gave you? You got what you needed, he retorted. You were always the smart one, the responsible one. I was just the screw-up they had to rescue. His words gave me pause. For the first time, I considered how our parents' differential treatment might have affected Ryan, how their lower expectations and constant bailouts might have been their own form of messaging about his capabilities. Maybe, I said more calmly, we were both damaged by their approach, just in different ways. The conversation ended without resolution, but it opened a door to a different understanding of our family dynamic, one where we were all both victims and perpetrators of unhealthy patterns. Over the next several months, I worked closely with my parents' financial advisor to stabilize their situation. They sold their large family home and moved to a comfortable but modest condo, using the equity to pay off other debts Ryan's business had accumulated. The process was painful but necessary, forcing them to confront not just their financial reality, but the choices that had led them there. Our family therapy sessions were equally challenging. My father, in particular, struggled to acknowledge how his words and actions had affected me. We always wanted the best for both of you, he insisted repeatedly. Wanting the best isn't the same as seeing and accepting who your children actually are, the therapist gently pointed out. Progress came in small moments. Mom asking detailed questions about my current project and listening attentively to the answers. Dad sending an article about women in technology with a note saying it made him think of me, both of them expressing genuine interest when James and I announced our engagement rather than immediately shifting the conversation to Ryan's latest situation. Ryan himself remained distant, both geographically and emotionally. He called occasionally, usually when he needed something, but made little effort to participate in the family's healing process. His resentment of my interference, as he called it, created a new tension, but one that reflected a more honest assessment of our family's reality rather than the pretense that had existed before. By the time I returned to Boston after my third visit in 6 months, something fundamental had shifted. My parents weren't transformed, but they were trying, sometimes clumsily, sometimes with surprising insight, to see me more clearly and value what they saw. And I was learning to accept their efforts without expecting perfection, to appreciate progress without demanding immediate resolution of decades-old wounds. Most importantly, I no longer measured my worth through their eyes. The year of distance had given me the space to develop confidence in my own judgment, to trust my own assessment of my life and choices. Their approval, while still emotionally meaningful, was no longer the currency of my self-worth. 2 years have passed since that fateful family dinner where my father's words, "In many ways, you're a failure," shattered the facade of our family dynamic. In those 2 years, nearly everything has changed, though not always in ways I could have predicted. Professionally, my trajectory continued upward. The data visualization system I developed was spun off as a separate product line, and I was appointed Director of Innovation for the new division. My team expanded to 25 developers across 3 countries, and I've spoken at conferences in 9 countries. The work remains challenging and rewarding, with the knowledge that our systems are used in over 400 hospitals, genuinely improving patient care and outcomes. James proposed during a weekend trip to Maine, presenting a ring on the summit of Cadillac Mountain as the sun rose over the Atlantic. We're planning a small wedding next spring, intimate and authentic rather than showy or traditional. My relationship with my parents has evolved into something I never imagined possible. Not perfect, not without occasional backsliding into old patterns, but fundamentally transformed. The financial crisis forced by Ryan's failed business became, ironically, the catalyst for genuine change. With their financial situation stabilized through downsizing and careful planning, and yes, my continued assistance with certain expenses, my parents have begun to build a new life focused on what truly matters to them rather than appearances or status. Dad joined a community theater group, something he'd always secretly wanted to try but considered frivolous. Mom volunteers teaching English to immigrants, reconnecting with her educator roots. More significantly, they've begun to recognize and appreciate my accomplishments on their own terms, rather than comparing them to an entrepreneurial ideal that never fit me. Dad called specifically to congratulate me when the medical journal article featuring our visualization system was published. Mom asked for advice when she wanted to create a simple website for her volunteer group. Small acknowledgments, but meaningful ones. Family therapy continued for 18 months, providing a structured environment to address decades of unexamined patterns and assumptions. During one particularly powerful session, my father managed what had seemed impossible before, a genuine apology. "I was wrong," he said simply. "Wrong to dismiss your path, wrong to call you a failure, wrong to miss seeing how exceptional you've always been. I was so fixated on what I thought success should look like that I couldn't recognize it in another form. I'm sorry, Abigail." That apology didn't instantly heal all wounds, but it created space for genuine forgiveness. Not the glossing over kind that pretends hurt never happened, but the authentic kind that acknowledges pain and chooses to move forward anyway. Ryan's journey has been more complicated. After Colorado, he moved to Arizona, then Texas, each time with a new venture that promised to be the big one. He resented my involvement in our parents' finances, seeing it as a power play rather than assistance. Our conversations remained tense and infrequent. The turning point came unexpectedly. Ryan's latest business, a predictably undercapitalized food truck concept, failed within months. With nowhere else to turn, and our parents no longer in a position to bail him out, he called me. "I need help," he admitted. "Not money," he added quickly, "just to advice. How do you do it? How do you build something that actually works?" That honest question opened a door to a different kind of relationship between us. I connected Ryan with a friend's small business incubator program, where for the first time he received realistic feedback and practical guidance rather than blind encouragement or dismissal. He's now working for a restaurant management company, learning the business from the ground up rather than trying to start at the top. "I might never be the entrepreneur Dad wanted me to be," he told me during a recent visit to Boston, "but I'm starting to figure out who I might actually be good at being." As James and I plan our wedding, the question of family involvement has required careful consideration. My parents will attend, of course, with appropriate roles in the ceremony. Ryan will be there, if he can maintain his current stability. But the majority of family present will be the one we've chosen. Friends, mentors, colleagues who have supported and celebrated us authentically. Therapy has helped me understand that the patterns in my family weren't unique or inevitable. Dr. Lynn introduced the concept of intergenerational trauma, how my father's own experience with a demanding, never satisfied father shaped his parenting, how my mother's role as a perpetual peacemaker reflected her childhood in a conflict-avoidant home. Understanding doesn't excuse harm, but it does contextualize it, making it possible to break cycles rather than perpetuate them. As James and I discuss having children someday, I'm conscious of the patterns I don't want to reproduce. The differential treatment, the conditional approval, the narrow definition of success. Instead, I want to create a home where achievement is valued but not required for love, where uniqueness is celebrated rather than compared. The journey from that devastating family dinner to today has been neither straight nor easy. There have been setbacks, painful conversations, moments when old wounds reopened. But the overall trajectory has been toward healing, Not the perfect healing of movies where one conversation resolves decades of hurt, but the messy, imperfect, real healing of actual human relationships. Sometimes people ask why I didn't cut contact permanently after such hurtful treatment. The answer is complex. For me, the temporary distance was necessary, a circuit breaker that stopped destructive patterns and created space for new understanding. But permanent estrangement wasn't what I ultimately needed or wanted. The goal wasn't punishment but transformation. Of our relationship, yes, but primarily of how I saw myself in relation to my family. The most profound change hasn't been in my parents' behavior, though that has improved significantly. It's been in my response to it. I no longer collapse when they fall short. I no longer measure my worth through their recognition. I can love them, flaws and all, without needing them to be different to validate my existence. That freedom, to love without requiring perfection, to maintain boundaries without burning bridges, to see family as important but not definitional, has been the most unexpected gift of this difficult journey. If you're in a similar situation, feeling unseen by family, struggling with differential treatment, questioning your worth because of others' assessments, please know that your value isn't determined by anyone else's ability to recognize it. Sometimes distance is necessary for healing. Sometimes confrontation is required for change. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and ultimately for your family, is to stand firmly in your truth and let others adjust to it rather than contorting yourself to meet their expectations. Have you ever had to create distance from family to maintain your self-respect? Did it lead to healing or permanent separation? Share your experience in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please subscribe to hear more reflections on family dynamics, setting boundaries, and building authentic success. Thank you for listening to my journey. I hope it helps you navigate your own with greater compassion for both yourself and those who may have hurt you.